On the day before we celebrate Easter or Resurrection Sunday, let's turn our attention to the name itself. There's been a lot of confusion and, frankly, some misinformation about where the term comes from. You'll often hear that Easter is rooted in pagan worship. I've heard this myself, and sometimes quite vigorously, that the term is supposedly tied to a fertility goddess named Eostre. That claim gets repeated so often you'd think it was widely attested, but here's the truth: it's not. The only historical reference we have to this supposed goddess comes from a single line in the writings of the English monk Bede, sometimes referred to as the Venerable Bede. He would live between 673 AD and would die in 735 AD. He claimed in his book, The Reckoning of Time, that the name of the month, Eostre, roughly corresponding to April, came from a Saxon goddess named Eostre. But even that reference is suspect. There's no archaeological evidence, no mention in earlier sources, and no indication that any widespread worship of such a goddess existed. Bede stands alone in making that connection. And unfortunately, his statement has been taken and exaggerated by others, especially or particularly Alexander Hislop, whose book, The Two Babylons, published in 1853, tried to tie almost every aspect of Christianity to pagan origins. Serious historians have long since discredited Hislop's claims, but despite that, his influence persists, especially among internet articles and conspiracy theorists and even Richard Dawkins. Now, contrast that with what we do know from solid historical sources. The term Easter was actually used in early English Bible translations. Tyndale, for instance, used the word Easter as a translation for Passover, and not because of any pagan influence, but because of how the term had come to be understood in his day. In fact, the connection to Ostern in German, which means resurrection, is key here. It shows us that the word had shifted in meaning to refer not to a goddess, but to the timing of Christ's resurrection. Again, it's not referring to a goddess, but Christ's resurrection. By the time of Tyndale and Luther, the word simply referred to the season of Passover, particularly in the context of Christ's death and resurrection. That's why Luther was comfortable calling Christ the Osterlamm, or resurrection lamb. Likewise, Tyndale referred to him as the Easter lamb. That's not paganism, that's a clear connection to the biblical account. Even the King James translators, who built on Tyndale's work, chose to keep the term Easter in one place, Acts 12:4. Some argue that this was deliberate to show that the reference was not to the Jewish feast of Passover in the Old Covenant, but to a post-resurrection celebration that was now distinct. That's a debated point, but it shows that the use of the word wasn't random or careless. Now, before English translations, the word used throughout the church was Pascha, from the Greek word for Passover. And this word had come to refer not only to the Jewish feast, but to the entire Passion weekend, Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. So in summary, while Easter may sound like it has pagan roots, the historical evidence just doesn't support that claim. It's far more likely that the term evolved through the German Ostern was tied to the resurrection and was used faithfully by men like Tyndale and Luther, who were deeply committed to biblical truth. Let's not allow poor history or discredited sources to rob us of the richness and clarity that faithful translations and traditions have preserved. Thank you, and I look forward to celebrating Easter tomorrow, and I hope you do too. Thank you, and God bless you.